Flames devour the insula. 5 stories collapse inward. Families scream from windows. Men in red tunics stand below, motionless. Their commander names a price. The owner refuses. The men watch it burn. On that day, a house wasn't the only thing collapsing. Rome was. Collapse rarely begins with fire. It begins with the people who profit from it. This is the story of how one man's fortune grew so large it broke the republic from within. The question isn't whether Marcus Licinius Crassus became the richest man in Roman history. The question is, what happens to a system when private wealth becomes more powerful than public institutions? Rome didn't collapse when it became poorer. It collapsed when the powerful became untouchable. Rome, 73 BCE? 2 centuries of conquest have flooded the city with tribute, land, and slaves. The wealth doesn't spread, it pools. And Crassus understands this before anyone else. He sees the Republic not as a political structure, but as a market with inefficiencies waiting to be exploited. He will exploit them with a precision that reshapes everything. His first fortune comes from death. During Sulla's proscriptions, the dictator posts lists of enemies to be executed, their estates seized. Crassus arrives at the auctions. He buys confiscated properties for fractions of their value. But he doesn't wait for the lists. He approaches men whose names haven't appeared yet, men who sense what's coming. He offers them pennies. Many sell. Those who refuse often find their names added to the next round. Crassus buys their estates afterward. By the time Sulla steps down, Crassus owns more urban real estate than anyone in the city's history. But the fires were only the beginning. A shopkeeper stands in the street, watching everything he owns turn to ash. Crassus's fire brigade arrived minutes after the flames started. They haven't moved. The commander explains the offer again. 1/10 the property's value. The adjacent buildings are catching now. The smoke thickens. The shopkeeper looks at his children. He signs. The men move instantly. They save what remains. Crassus owns the block. Rome has no public fire service. Crassus creates the first private one. 500 trained slaves, architects and engineers among them, organized into rapid response units. When a building catches fire, his men arrive first. They negotiate, not extinguish. Owner refuses, brigade withdraws. Owner accepts, the men work with precision. Crassus rebuilds cheap, maximizes density, rents to the growing mass of landless poor. His portfolio expands with every fire. The more Rome burns, the wealthier he becomes. It's a formula. Disaster creates opportunity. Opportunity creates wealth. Wealth creates power. But real estate is only the foundation. Crassus recognizes that true wealth flows through a different channel, the conversion of public resources into private assets. He purchases silver mines across Hispania, operations worked by thousands of war slaves. The mines produce enormous output. The revenue flows directly to him, bypassing the Senate, the Treasury, the structures meant to distribute wealth across the citizenry. He extracts value from conquered territory faster than the state itself. Rome conquers. Crassus profits. A tenant family wakes in a 7th-floor room in one of Crassus's insulae. The walls are thin. The timber creaks. The father leaves before dawn for day labor at the docks, competing with 50 other men for work that pays barely enough to survive. The mother watches 3 children in a space barely large enough to lie down. They pay half the father's earnings in rent. They owned land once, a small farm 2 days south. They lost it to debt. Now they own nothing. In Rome's system, that means their vote counts for almost nothing. The streets fill with people like them, dispossessed, packed into vertical slums, dependent on the grain dole. When the middle class thins, the center cannot hold, and Rome's center is thinning fast. What came next changed Rome far more than any flame. Crassus doesn't hoard his fortune. He weaponizes it. He becomes the Republic's largest private creditor. Senators borrow to fund campaigns. Magistrates borrow to maintain status. Military commanders borrow to pay legions. Most cannot repay. Crassus doesn't demand repayment. He demands favors, votes, appointments, postings. The political system warps around his financial gravity. This isn't corruption in the traditional sense. It's structural capture. The institutions still function, but they function in service of private wealth rather than public interest. A senator sits in his villa at night, reviewing his debts by lamplight. He owes Crassus more than he can ever repay from his provincial governorship. His hands shake as he reads the numbers. A letter arrives the next morning. Crassus needs a vote on land distribution. The senator knows the bill will harm his constituents, the small farmers who elected him. He votes for it anyway. The debt doesn't disappear, but Crassus extends the terms. The senator remains in office. The system bends a little further. A republic doesn't collapse when laws fail. It collapses when people stop believing laws apply to everyone. Here's what most people never notice. When wealth becomes strong enough to ignore the system, it becomes strong enough to replace it. That's the moment collapse stops being theoretical. The mechanism accelerates. Wealth concentration and political disempowerment move together. The Oxford Roman Economy Project documents late Republic inequality, reaching levels unseen again until the industrial age. Over 70% of Italy's wealth concentrated in less than 5% of the population. But this isn't about numbers. It's about feedback loops. Wealth buys access. Access shapes policy. Policy protects wealth. The loop tightens with every transaction. Small farmers cannot compete with massive slave-worked estates. No wages match free labor. No small plot matches industrial scale. They sell for whatever price they can get. They take their families to Rome. They arrive at the city and find themselves in Crassus's buildings, paying rent that consumes half their income. They have no land now. In Rome's electoral system, that means they have almost no vote. The people who built the republic lose their stake in it. When citizens become tenants, citizenship becomes hollow. The forum grows louder. The grain dole expands. The mob becomes a political force, but one without leverage. They can riot. They cannot legislate. The Senate, meanwhile, grows more dependent on men like Crassus. Campaigns cost more. Building projects cost more. Military commands cost more. And Crassus has what everyone needs: capital. In the streets, the gap between the towers on Palatine Hill and the insulae below becomes impossible to ignore. Wealth isn't just visible. It's architectural. The elite build higher, marble and gold gleaming in the sun. The poor pack tighter, 7 stories of timber and desperation. The social fabric stretches, and everyone can feel it pulling apart. A society breaks when its safeguards become symbolic. He makes his move into military power. He uses his fortune to secure command against Spartacus, the slave rebellion threatening Italy. He wins barely, crucifying 6,000 captives along the Appian Way from Capua to Rome. The bodies hang for months, a warning stretching 70 miles. But victory doesn't bring the glory he expects. Pompey arrives late, claims credit, secures the consulship. Crassus is left with wealth but not legitimacy. So he does what concentrated wealth always does when it meets political resistance. He purchases the system. He forms the first triumvirate with Pompey and Julius Caesar. It's not a formal institution. It's a private agreement among 3 men to bypass the Senate entirely. Crassus finances Caesar's political rise, covering his debts, funding his campaigns, bankrolling his games for the public. In return, Caesar delivers legislation favorable to Crassus's interests. The Journal of Roman Studies documents how major policy decisions in this period increasingly occur outside formal deliberative structures. The Republic's institutions still exist. They just don't matter anymore. The real decisions happen in private meetings between creditors and debtors. The Senate debates. The people vote. But the outcomes are determined before anyone speaks. When wealth becomes a substitute for law, the law becomes optional. And when laws become optional for some, they lose legitimacy for all. Crassus makes one final calculation. He's the richest man in Rome, but Pompey has military glory and Caesar is rising fast. He demands a command to match their prestige, a campaign against Parthia, Rome's great rival to the east. He's 60 years old, no military genius, but convinced that conquest will cement his legacy. He marches 7 legions into Mesopotamia. At Carrhae, Parthian cavalry surrounds his army. 20,000 Romans die in a single afternoon, cut down by arrows in the desert heat. Crassus is captured. The Parthians, according to legend, execute him by pouring molten gold down his throat. A fitting end for a man who lived by wealth. The metal he spent his life accumulating becomes the instrument of his death. But his death doesn't end the collapse. The mechanisms he built continue. The concentration of resources, the capture of institutions, the conversion of public wealth into private assets. These forces outlive him. The triumvirate fractures. Civil war erupts between Pompey and Caesar. Caesar crosses the Rubicon. The Republic dies not in a single catastrophic moment, but through the accumulated weight of structural failures that men like Crassus engineered over decades. The system couldn't absorb the inequality. It couldn't correct the feedback loops. It buckled. This is part one. One man who understood that in a system without safeguards, wealth doesn't just accumulate, it transforms the system itself. The middle class erodes, the institutions hollow out, and by the time people realize what's happening, the mechanisms are already locked in place. The collapse isn't sudden. It's structural, and it begins long before anyone is willing to see it. If you want to understand how collapse begins, quietly, long before anyone notices, stay close.